And that's really the heart of the issue when you're talking about water rights in this county. It affects everyone from the ranchers to the new homeowners.
Yeah.
The glass didn't shatter dramatically. It simply fell a clean arc off the edge of the white linen tablecloth, tumbling in the slow-motion way that expensive crystal sometimes falls, as if even gravity wanted to give it one last moment of dignity before it met the marble floor of the 48th level of the Autumn Crown. The sound it made was not loud, but in a room where the conversation had been calibrated for decades to remain at a precise, civilized volume where men in tailored charcoal suits discussed nine-figure acquisitions as casually as they might discuss the weather, where women in silk and pearls laughed in measured, practiced tones that never rose above the soft swelling of the string quartet in the corner. The sound of that single glass landing on that pale marble floor was, for a fraction of a second, the loudest thing in the world. Every head turned. Not dramatically. These were people who had long since mastered the art of the composed glance. But they turned. Every single one of them. And what they saw stopped the room entirely. A child, a girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, standing beside table 14, the corner booth overlooking the Manhattan skyline, the seat that the Autumn Crown reserved for certain guests, the seat that this particular Thursday evening belonged to Victoria Sterling. The girl wore a navy blue quilted jacket that had seen better seasons. Her sneakers, white once, now the gray of many school days, were damp from the autumn drizzle that had been falling since 4 o'clock. Her hair was dark and pulled back with a pink rubber band. Not the velvet kind, the cheap kind you found at the bottom of a school bag. She was holding something in both hands. A paper bag, the kind from a craft store, its sides decorated in careful marker drawings of stars. 5-pointed stars, the kind a child draws when she is trying very hard. The restaurant's floor manager, a tall man named Harrison, who had worked this room for 11 years and prided himself on having seen everything, was already moving. The sommelier who had dropped the glass stood frozen, a wine-dark stain spreading across the pristine white of his jacket cuff. 2 security personnel were converging from opposite ends of the room. No one could understand how the child had gotten past the lobby. The Autumn Crown had 3 checkpoints. They would later determine that she had slipped in behind a catering delivery, waited in a corridor near the service elevator, and then walked with such unhesitating purpose toward table 14 that the floor staff had assumed she belonged to someone. She had that kind of walk. The walk of a child who has been told, very clearly, exactly where she is going and why. Victoria Sterling had not yet looked up from the glass. She was 33 years old, the sole heir to Sterling Systems, a technology conglomerate that her grandfather had built from a single hardware distribution business in New Jersey, and which she had, in the 11 years since his death, transformed into something that now touched through software, infrastructure, cloud architecture, and 6 subsidiary companies, nearly a fifth of all enterprise technology contracts on the eastern seaboard. She was, by most measures that the people in this room used to measure things, enormously powerful. She was also, in this moment, very still. She had noticed the child before the glass fell. She had been watching the girl's approach from the corner of her eye. That particular awareness she had developed over years of rooms full of people who wanted things from her, the low-level radar that never fully switched off. She had seen the damp sneakers, the paper bag, the rubber band, and she had felt something she couldn't immediately name. Then the glass fell. And now every person in the Autumn Crown was watching table 14. The floor manager was nearly at the girl's side. The security personnel were close behind. And then a voice cut across the room. Not loud, not aggressive. Perfectly, almost eerily, calm. "She's with me." Every person in the room shifted their attention to the elevator bank at the far end of the dining room. A man was walking toward them. He was perhaps 35. He wore a dark suit that was not cheap, exactly, but was several calibrations below what this room was used to. The cut was slightly off through the shoulders, the lapels a fraction too wide for current fashion, the kind of suit a man owned one of and wore to the events that required it. His shirt was white and clean, and his tie was a deep burgundy, knotted carefully. His shoes were black and had been polished by hand. You could tell by the slight unevenness, the way the shine collected differently at the toe than a machine would produce. He crossed the room without hurrying, without looking at anyone but the girl. When he reached table 14, he placed one hand gently on the child's shoulder. His hand was large. The knuckles were slightly roughened. There was a faint trace of something dark under one fingernail. Not dirt, exactly. The kind of stain that doesn't entirely wash out. The floor manager looked at him. Then at Victoria. Victoria Sterling looked at the man's hand on the girl's shoulder for a long moment. Then she looked up at his face. "She's with me," the man said again, this time to Victoria. Quieter. Not as a challenge. Not as a plea. Simply as a statement of fact. The room waited. Her name was Lily Carter. This is what the room would not know, because the room did not get to hear her introduction. But Victoria heard it, because Victoria leaned slightly forward in her chair and asked, in a voice much quieter than her usual boardroom register, "What's your name?" "Lily," the girl said. "Lily Carter. How old are you?" "Lily. 8. A pause. 8.5. The half is important. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Victoria's expression. Not a smile, not quite. Something smaller. "Lily," she said, "do you know where you are?" "Yes," Lily said. She did not appear frightened. She appeared, Victoria would later think, like a small person who had been frightened and had decided to do the thing anyway. "There is a difference. You're Victoria Sterling. You run a company. I looked you up." The sommelier had finished quietly cleaning the wine. The floor manager had retreated to a discreet distance, close enough to intervene, far enough to be invisible. The rest of the room had, with practiced social grace, returned to the appearances of their own conversations, while maintaining perfect peripheral awareness of table 14. "You looked me up," Victoria repeated. "My dad helped. He knows how to find things." Lily glanced back at the man behind her, then returned her attention to Victoria with the focused seriousness of someone who has rehearsed this moment. "I came because I wanted to say thank you." "Thank you," Victoria said carefully. Lily set the paper bag on the edge of the table. It made a small, careful sound. "For Maplewood," she said. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about Maplewood," she said, and the girl told her. Maplewood Public School sat on the corner of Fairview and Ash in a part of Brooklyn that the real estate listings had begun, in recent years, to call transitional, which was the word people used when they meant that things were changing in ways that benefited some people and complicated the lives of others. The school had been in 1962 and had been maintained by the city with the particular brand of institutional neglect that came from having too many competing needs and not enough resources. A leaking gymnasium roof that had been patched and repatched for 6 years, classroom windows that let in the cold from October through April. Computer equipment that had last been updated in a year before most of the students had been born. 3 months ago, the school had been 12 weeks away from closure. The structural assessment had been delivered in September. The building required $1.8 million in critical repairs to remain in operation. The district did not have the funds. Parents had organized. Teachers had written letters. The local news had run 2 pieces. Nothing had moved. Then, the Sterling Foundation had released its fall education grant cycle. The Maplewood application, written by the school's principal and revised 17 times over 4 weeks, had been one of 312 applications received. It had been awarded $3 million. Victoria remembered the grant cycle. She did not remember Maplewood specifically. She reviewed the applications by category and final summary. The individual disbursements were processed by her foundation's program officers. The 3 million had been one entry among many in a spreadsheet she had approved in a 15-minute review session on a Tuesday morning in October. She had not thought about it again. Lily Carter had thought about it every day since. "My teacher told us at assembly," Lily said. She cried. Mrs. Hennessy doesn't cry. She's really serious. But she cried. Lily paused, looking at the paper bag. "I told my dad that I wanted to come say thank you in person. He said that was the right thing to do." Victoria looked at the man, the girl's father, over Lily's shoulder. He met her gaze steadily. He had gray eyes, she noticed. Not the dramatic kind. The kind that were simply, straightforwardly, looking at her. "Your teacher thought I wouldn't remember," Victoria said. Lily nodded. "She said people like you do a lot of things. She said you probably have a list and we're just a number on it." Victoria was quiet. "Your dad," she said. "He disagreed? He said it doesn't matter if you remember. He said we should say thank you anyway." He said Lily screwed up her face slightly, retrieving the exact words. "He said that gratitude isn't about making someone feel good. It's about being the kind of person who says it." The string quartet in the corner shifted from Vivaldi to something slower. Victoria Sterling looked at the paper bag on the edge of her table. "What's in the bag, Lily?" His name was Daniel Carter. This is what the room would not have guessed, not from looking at him. What the room would have guessed incorrectly, as rooms tend to do, was something vaguely professional. Perhaps a mid-level manager brought along as an escort, or a family member of one of the staff. The suit, the composure, the way he held himself, none of it quite fit any of the categories this room used to sort the world. What Daniel Carter actually was. The owner of Carter Auto Service on Greenpoint Avenue, a single-bay repair shop he had operated for 7 years, since the year Lily was born, and the year his wife, Rebecca, had died of a pulmonary embolism at 31 years old, 6 weeks after their daughter's birth. He employed himself and, seasonally, a part-time mechanic named Grant who was studying for his certification. He worked Monday through Saturday. He coached Lily's soccer team on Sunday mornings. He made Lily's lunch every day and had, for the past 3 years, been putting $20 a week into an envelope in his sock drawer that he thought of as the college fund, though he tried not to think about it too specifically because the math, worked out carefully, suggested it would cover approximately 1 semester of a state school by the time Lily turned 18, which was not an encouraging calculation. He was not poor in the way that made strangers uncomfortable. He was careful. He paid his bills on time. He cooked real meals. He read to Lily every night until she was 6, and after that he listened to her read to him, and he asked her questions about what she'd read that required actual answers. He had, in short, built a life that worked, but he was, in any objective sense, a long way from the autumn crown. He had known that. He had known it when Lily, 3 weeks ago, had announced at dinner that she wanted to find Victoria Sterling and say thank you. He had known it when he'd spent 2 evenings looking into how the foundation worked and where its public events were listed, and had found, through the Sterling Foundation's community relations page, the information about tonight's dinner. It was a semi-public benefit event, the first hour of which was technically open to registered community attendees who had business with the foundation. He had registered. He had arrived with Lily at 7 o'clock. He had been waiting in the lobby for 40 minutes while Lily grew increasingly determined, and he had been trying to figure out the right way to approach the floor manager when Lily had simply, quietly, walked to the elevator and pressed the button for 48. He had followed her. That was what you did. Now he stood in the most expensive restaurant he had ever been in, with his daughter's shoulder under his hand, and a woman who could buy his entire block looking at him with an expression he couldn't immediately read. She was not what he'd expected. He'd done his own research, not deep, just the basic shape of her. The profiles described someone sharp, difficult, private, effective, The photographs showed someone who dressed and held herself with the absolute certainty of a person who had never had reason to doubt that she belonged wherever she stood. Up close, she looked like someone who was trying to remember something. "Your daughter is remarkable," Victoria said to him. "I know," he said. It was not a boastful answer. It was the simple acknowledgement of an observed fact, offered without elaboration. Victoria noticed that. "I imagine this took some courage," she said. "For both of you. Lily's courage is hers," Daniel said. "I just drove her here. In my experience, that's not nothing." He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. "I suppose it's not." Lily reached into the paper bag with both hands. She removed a folded card, first construction paper, purple, with a drawing on the front. The drawing showed, as near as Victoria could tell, a large building, presumably a school, with a sun above it and several small figures arranged outside, some of them appearing to hold hands. In the corner of the drawing, in careful, slightly tilted handwriting, asterisk. "Thank you, from Maplewood." Asterisk. Then Lily reached in again and removed the second thing. It was a star, ceramic, small enough to fit in a closed fist. 5-pointed, hand-formed, you could see the fingerprints in the surface where the clay had been pressed and smoothed by small hands. It had been painted gold, though the paint was uneven, thicker in some places than others, and one of the points had a small chip at the tip where something had knocked it. It was the most imperfect thing Victoria Sterling had seen in a very long time. She received it from Lily's hands with both of hers. It was heavier than she expected. "My art teacher taught us," Lily explained. "She said that when someone does something kind for you, you should give them a star. Because kindness is like stars. It lights things up when it's dark." Lily looked at the ceramic star in Victoria's hands. "Mine came out a little crooked. The point broke when I dropped it. But Dad said the good ones are always a little imperfect." Victoria looked at the star. She thought about her office on the 32nd floor, where the surface of her desk was a slab of black walnut that had cost more than the entire annual operating budget of Maplewood Public School. She thought about the awards on her wall, the 3 industry recognitions, the 2 honorary degrees, the framed Times Fortuna cover from 2 years ago, all of them straight, all of them perfect, all of them produced by committees and organizations whose entire purpose was to formally recognize the kind of power she represented. None of them had ever felt like this. "Your teacher sounds wise," Victoria said. "Mrs. Chen," Lily said. "She's the best. She's staying because of the grant." She was going to have to leave. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Lily," she said, "would you like to sit down? Let the record show, or rather, let the people at Table 9 and Table 12 and Table 20, who would all discuss this over the following week in ways that would eventually become something like legend in certain circles, let them record what they saw." They saw Victoria Sterling, who had not invited a guest to her table at the Autumn Crown since the renovations 3 years ago, pull back the chair to her right. They saw a small girl in damp sneakers sit down in it. They saw the girl's father hesitate. They saw Victoria Sterling look at him and say, quietly but with complete clarity, "Please." They saw him sit. This was, in the compressed social language of the Autumn Crown on a Thursday evening, an extraordinary sequence of events. The whispers began. They were controlled whispers. This room did not do anything that wasn't controlled, but they were genuine. Who was the man? Who was the child? What had the child given Victoria Sterling? And why was Victoria Sterling looking at it the way she was looking at it? None of them, even the most perceptive observers at the most strategically located tables, could have answered the deeper question. What was Victoria Sterling actually thinking? The answer was this. She was thinking about a school. Not Maplewood. A different school, a public school in New Jersey, 3 towns north of where she'd grown up, a school with a cafeteria that smelled of industrial cleaner and a gymnasium that was also an auditorium and a lunchroom, depending on the time of day. She was thinking about a winter coat she had worn until she was 13, when her mother, who worked the early shift at a diner and the late shift at a hotel, had saved enough to buy her a new one. She was thinking about the particular quality of light in a classroom where the fluorescent tubes were half working and the windows were painted shut. She was thinking about how she had gotten from that school to this table, and she was thinking about a very simple question that no one had asked her in a very long time. Perhaps because no one in her current life had the standing to ask it. Asterisk. When did giving money become a spreadsheet? Asterisk. She looked at the star in her hands. The chipped point. The uneven gold paint. She placed it carefully beside her water glass. Tell me about the stars, she said to Lily. You mentioned you like them. Lily's face changed entirely. The careful, rehearsed quality of the thank you mission dissolved. What replaced it was something unguarded and immediate. I love them, she said. Did you know that some of the stars we can see are already gone? Like, by the time the light reaches us, they've already burned out. We're seeing light from thousands of years ago. Isn't that the weirdest thing? It is, Victoria said. And for the first time in what felt like a very long time, she meant it completely. During the next hour, Daniel Carter said very little. He was not, by nature, a loud man. He did not fill silence the way some people did, out of discomfort or habit. He watched the room, and he watched his daughter. And occasionally he answered a question when Victoria directed one at him. But mostly he let Lily talk. Lily talked about stars. She talked about a geode she had found at a nature center in upstate New York, a hollow gray rock that had split open to reveal a cathedral of purple amethyst crystals inside. She talked about the book she was currently reading, which was a children's encyclopedia of earth science that she had taken out of the school library 6 times because she kept finding new things in it. She talked about how she wanted to be a geologist, or possibly an astronaut, or possibly both, because she had learned that some geological formations on other planets were similar to ones on Earth, which meant that the 2 careers were actually connected if you thought about it the right way. Victoria listened with the quality of attention that Lily, at 8, could feel but not name, the kind of listening that is actually listening, not the performance of it. At one point, between Lily's explanation of tectonic plates and her pivot to the topic of the Maplewood Science Fair, Victoria looked at Daniel and said, "You're raising someone extraordinary." "I'm trying to raise someone honest," he said. "The extraordinary part is hers. Is there a difference?" He thought about it. "I think the honest part is the foundation. The rest builds on its own, if you get the foundation right." Victoria considered this. She had built an enormous amount on what she believed was a solid foundation, ambition, intelligence, discipline, an almost surgical ability to identify inefficiency and correct it. She had not, she now thought, spent much time recently examining the foundation itself. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. When Lily said she wanted to come here, you must have known how this could go. This room. This environment. It's not exactly designed for," she stopped, "for people like us," Daniel said, not with bitterness, simply with clarity. "I was going to say, for children." "Same principle," he said. "I knew how it could go. I also knew that if I didn't bring her, I'd be teaching her that some spaces were too important to enter, that some people were too significant to approach. That's not something I want to teach her." Victoria was quiet for a moment, even if it went badly, especially then. The lesson would have been, you tried. You were brave. Some things don't work out. That's still a useful lesson, but it didn't go badly. He looked at his daughter, who was now drawing a diagram of tectonic plate movement on the back of a cocktail napkin to illustrate her point to Victoria. "No," he said. "It didn't. Does that change the lesson?" He smiled for the first time. It was a small smile, not performed. "It changes the story," he said. "Not the lesson. The lesson was the same either way." Victoria looked at him for a moment. She had spent 11 years in rooms full of people who said interesting things, Most of the things they said were crafted to produce a specific effect. This man was saying things because they were true. She found it, unexpectedly, restful. Friday arrived gray and cold and wet, the kind of morning that Manhattan produces in October with particular efficiency. At 8:45 in the morning, a black car stopped in front of Maplewood Public School on the corner of Fairview and Ash. Victoria Sterling stepped out. She was alone. No communications director, no assistant. She had told her driver to park around the corner and wait. She stood on the sidewalk in front of the school for a moment. It looked in the gray morning light exactly like what it was. A building from 1962 that had been kept alive through continuous repair and institutional stubbornness. The brick facade was clean but stained by decades of weather. The front entrance had new doors, those had likely come from the grant, she noted, but the concrete steps leading up to them were cracked along the left edge. Above the main roofline, she could see where the patching had been done, visible in the different shade of the newer material against the old. The principal came to meet her. His name was Robert Ashworth, a tall man in his mid-50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the slightly caffeinated alertness of someone who had been managing a school building since 6 in the morning. He had received a call from the Sterling Foundation the previous evening saying that Victoria Sterling would be visiting the following morning for an informal assessment. He had not slept especially well. "Miss Sterling," he said, "thank you for coming. Thank you for having me on short notice," she said. "I want to see the building. All of it, not the rooms you've prepared. I mean the rooms with the problems." He looked at her for a moment. "All right." She spent 90 minutes walking through Maplewood Public School. She saw the gymnasium, where the floor had been refinished with grant money, but where the ceiling still showed the water damage. From 6 years of the leaking roof, long brown stains that had soaked into the acoustic tiles and would require replacement of the tiles in addition to the roof repair to fully address. She saw the science room, which had new equipment that the teachers had clearly arranged with great care, making the most of a small space. She saw the library, which had new books. She ran her finger along the spines of a row of earth science reference books and thought, "Asterisk, she's probably read these," and old shelving that tilted slightly to the left along one wall. She asked Ashworth about the roof. He told her the repair was scheduled to begin in January. The structural work would take 6 weeks. During that time, 3 classrooms would need to be temporarily relocated. She asked about the long-term capital plan. He paused. "We don't have one," he said. "Historically, schools in our district have operated on an annual maintenance cycle. Long-term capital planning requires a level of certainty about future funding that we haven't had. What would a 5-year capital plan for this building require?" He paused again, longer this time. He had numbers. He'd done the math, he told her. In the grant application, not the numbers they'd submitted, which were the minimum needed to keep the doors open, but the full picture. To bring this building to a standard where I'm not looking at the ceiling every time it rains. Probably $3.2 million over 5 years. Prioritized correctly. Victoria stood at the window of the 3rd-floor hallway and looked out at the school's blacktop yard, where a group of second graders were running in circles in their coats, supervised by a young teacher who was running with them. "Tell me about your enrollment," she said. 340 students, Ashworth said. 81% qualify for free or reduced lunch. 62% are first or second generation immigrant families. We have 17 languages spoken in this building. He paused. We also have some of the highest parent-teacher meeting attendance in the district. Our teachers don't leave. Most of them have been here more than 7 years. One of them has been here 23 years. Victoria looked at the children running on the blacktop. She thought about spreadsheets. She thought about grant cycles and program officers and applications reviewed by category and summary. She thought about the fact that she had approved a $3 million grant in a 15-minute session and had not thought about it again. She thought about a ceramic star with a chipped point. "Mr. Ashworth," she said, "I'd like to establish a direct relationship between the Sterling Foundation and Maplewood. not through the standard grant cycle. A dedicated partnership, capital planning, facility assessment, and curriculum support. Multi-year. Robert Ashworth looked at her. "Why?" he said. It was, she thought, a very good question. Most people in his position would not have asked it. They would have said thank you and scheduled a follow-up meeting. "Because I forgot what the money was for," she said. "And someone reminded me." He studied her face for a moment. He had been a school principal for 14 years. He could read people with the accuracy of someone who had spent a professional lifetime watching children try to hide things from adults. "The girl," he said. "Lily Carter." Victoria looked at him. "You know her?" "Third grade. Mrs. Hennessy's class." A slight smile. "She told the whole class she was going to find you and say thank you in person. Mrs. Hennessy thought it was a lovely idea in theory and would never actually happen." He paused. "I take it happened." "It happened," Victoria said. The Sterling Foundation's board met the following Tuesday. There were 7 members, 3 external directors, 2 foundation staff, and Victoria herself, who served as chair. They met quarterly under normal circumstances. This meeting was not normal circumstances. Victoria stood at the front of the room, glass-walled, on the 32nd floor, overlooking a city that was mostly cloud and reflected light on this particular Tuesday morning, and she presented what she had been working on since Friday. The Sterling Education Initiative, in its current form, distributed approximately $12 million annually across a grant cycle that processed several hundred applications and dispersed funds to selected recipients. The process was rigorous. The program officers were excellent. The outcomes were tracked and reported. By any standard metrics for foundation management, it was a well-run operation. What it was not, Victoria told the board, was a relationship. She proposed a restructuring. The grant cycle would continue, but a portion of the foundation's education portfolio, she was proposing to begin with, $36 million over 3 years, would be redirected to a direct partnership model with 20 schools in the city, chosen through an assessment process that she intended to personally review, not for photo opportunities, for assessment. She would visit each school. She would understand each building, each community, each specific set of problems. One of the external directors, a man named Whitfield who had been on the board for 6 years, and whose primary contribution was the periodic application of a useful skepticism, said, "What's changed?" "My relationship to the work," Victoria said. "Can you be more specific?" "I approved a $3 million grant in October without knowing the name of the school that received it," she said. That grant kept a school open that 340 children attend. One of those children's fathers drove her to a restaurant on a Thursday evening because she wanted to say thank you in person. She paused. "I've been running a foundation that does good work. I haven't been running a foundation that I understand." Whitfield was quiet for a moment. "And this restructuring addresses that? It requires me to understand it," she said. "That's a different thing." The board voted. 6-1. Whitfield abstained, which for him was essentially an approval. The restructuring passed. The Star sat on Victoria Sterling's desk for 3 weeks before she moved it. During those 3 weeks, it occupied a position to the left of her laptop, slightly inside the pool of light cast by the desk lamp. Her assistant, a composed young woman named Charlotte who had worked for Victoria for 4 years and had long since stopped being surprised by anything, noticed it on the first morning and did not comment on it. She would later say, to a colleague, that she had understood immediately that it was not to be moved, organized, or referred to, without being told. Charlotte was perceptive. This is why she had lasted 4 years. The Star was there when Victoria took calls from the program officers reviewing the new direct partnership model. It was there when she video-conferenced with architects about the Maplewood Capital Assessment. It was there when she reviewed the initial list of candidate schools for the expanded initiative. and made 3 phone calls to principals whose applications she had questions about, calls that the principals, unaccustomed to hearing directly from a foundation chair, mostly received with the silence of people who could not determine whether they were in trouble. She was not calling to tell them they were in trouble. She was calling to learn what they needed. This distinction took most of the principals approximately 4 minutes to understand. Then, most of them talked for a very long time. When Victoria moved the star, she moved it to the windowsill. The south-facing window of her office caught the afternoon light, and the ceramic, which had seemed merely gold under the overhead lighting, turned out in direct sunlight to contain something slightly more complex. The paint had been applied unevenly over a base clay that was a warm terracotta, and where the gold paint was thinner, the clay color showed through, giving the star a warmth it didn't have in artificial light. She stood at the window for a moment, holding it. It was imperfect. It was chipped. It was the most honest thing in her office. She put it back on the windowsill. The Sterling Foundation's annual stakeholder dinner took place on the 3rd Thursday of November. It was not held at the Autumn Crown. It was held at a slightly different venue, a historic building in Midtown, with a ballroom that the foundation used for its larger events. There were 240 attendees: foundation donors, program partners, educators, community leaders. Less rarefied than the Autumn Crown. More various. Victoria arrived early. She had done something specific in the arrangements. She had reserved 2 seats at table 2, which was positioned, by the particular geometry of this room, at a point from which you could see both the entrance and the stage, and she had not told her assistant who they were for. She had simply noted, *, reserved, arriving at 7:30, *. At 7:20, she was at the entrance. At 7:31, the elevator doors opened. Lily Carter was wearing a dress that was clearly not worn, often dark green, with a white collar, the kind of dress that comes out for school concerts and holidays. Her hair was down, which was different from the rubber band arrangement of 6 weeks ago, and someone her father, probably, or possibly Lily herself, had made an effort with it. She was wearing the same sneakers, but they had been cleaned. Daniel Carter was wearing the same suit. Different tie, dark blue tonight, not burgundy. He had the look of a man who had once again polished his shoes by hand, and who was not going to let this room intimidate him. Not because he was unaware of the room, but because he had decided not to be intimidated. Victoria walked to meet them at the elevator. "You came," she said. "You invited us," Lily said, with the mild surprise of someone who had not expected that to be a noteworthy observation. "I did," Victoria said. She looked at Daniel. He was looking at the room, not nervously. "The way someone looks at a new landscape. It's different from last time," he said. "I chose it deliberately," she said. She walked them to table 2. Lily looked at the room with the alert, categorizing gaze of someone filing information away for later reference. At one point, she turned to Victoria and said, in the tone of an announcement, "There are exactly 12 chandeliers in this room. I counted from the entrance. Is that right?" Victoria said. 12, Lily confirmed. "I like 12. It's a highly composite number." Victoria looked at Daniel. He shrugged slightly, with the contained pride of someone who has learned that the best thing to do when Lily is being Lily is to let it happen. "She's been like this since she was 4, he said. "You can't explain it. You can only make sure she has enough books." They sat. During the dinner, Lily explained the highly composite number. She explained the difference between a composite number and a prime number, and she explained why highly composite numbers were interesting from a geometric perspective, which led naturally to Lily, at least to the topic of crystalline structure in minerals, specifically the way that certain crystals formed along mathematically predictable axes, which connected, in a way she demonstrated with her fork and her knife and 2 pieces of bread, to the structure of snowflakes. Victoria asked questions. The questions were genuine. This is the thing about genuine questions: they are distinguishable, by almost everyone, from the performed variety. Lily, who had very good instincts about when adults were actually listening and when they were waiting for her to finish, noticed. She talked more freely. Daniel watched them. He watched his daughter explaining snowflake crystallography to one of the most powerful women in the city, using dinner silverware as visual aids, with the complete unself-consciousness of a child who has simply found someone willing to listen. He thought about Rebecca. He thought about how she would have laughed at this scene, not dismissively, but with the specific joy of someone watching the world be more interesting than expected. He thought about it quietly and without grief, which was new. The grief had not gone away. It had simply found a proper place to live, somewhere that was not in the way of everything else. He was not sure exactly when that had happened. Partway through the main course, Victoria excused herself to deliver a brief address to the room, 15 minutes, about the Foundation's new direction, the direct partnership model, the 20 schools. She did not use the word times pivot asterisk. She used the word times recalibration asterisk. Afterward, when she returned to table 2, Lily looked up at her and said, "You said it was because people reminded you what the work was for." "Who reminded you?" Victoria sat down. She picked up her water glass. "A girl who made me a star," she said. Lily thought about this. "That was me," she said. "I know. Did it help?" Victoria looked at the child. 8.5. Navy dress. White sneakers. The absolute fearless directness of someone who has not yet learned to be afraid of the truth. "Yes," Victoria said. It helped. Later, much later, after the dinner, after Daniel had driven home through the light traffic of a Thursday night, after Lily had fallen asleep in the back seat, still talking about highly composite numbers, Daniel would try to name what had happened over the past 6 weeks. He had a practical mind. He liked things to make sense, to have identifiable causes and legible effects. This was useful in his work engine problems, had diagnoses. Broken things had fixable parts. A car that ran wrong could, if you listened carefully enough, tell you what it needed. People were more complicated. But what had happened, he thought, was not actually that complicated. It was only unusual. A woman with enormous resources had lost the connection between the resources and the reason for them. A child had walked into a room where the child did not belong, carrying a chipped ceramic star, and had reinstated that connection by the simple act of making it personal. The child had been able to do this because she was not afraid. She was not afraid because she had been taught, specifically and deliberately, that saying thank you was not about the response you received, that some rooms were worth entering even if they didn't welcome you, that the point of courage was not the absence of fear but the decision to go anyway. These were things Daniel had told her. He had told her in small ways, over 8 years, in the particular accumulation of small decisions that constitutes a life. The decision to show up for her soccer team, even on the Sunday mornings when he'd worked until 11 the night before, the decision to read to her until she could read herself and then to listen to her read, the decision to drive across a bridge on a rainy October evening and stand in a restaurant that cost more per plate than his weekly grocery budget. He had not thought of these as lessons. They were just the things you did. But they had added up to a child who walked into the 48th floor of the Autumn Crown and handed a star to a billionaire and said, without any performance or pretense, asterisk, "I came to say thank you." Asterisk. And the billionaire had changed. Daniel was not naive enough to think that one evening had altered everything. He knew the world operated on inertia. He knew that foundations reformed slowly, that power changed its directions gradually, that the distance between his neighborhood and Victoria Sterling's office was not measured only in miles. But he also knew that 340 children were in a school that was not closing. He knew that 20 more schools would, by spring, have the kind of direct relationship with the Sterling Foundation that made the difference between a grant cycle number and a known name. He knew that a woman who had once processed $3 million in 15 minutes was now personally calling school principals to ask what they needed. He knew that the star on the windowsill was not nothing. The car stopped at a red light. In the back seat, Lily made a small sound, not awake, not entirely asleep. The sound of someone at the edge of a dream. He turned to look at her. Green dress, white sneakers. Hair still mostly down from the evening, one strand across her cheek. He thought about Rebecca. He always thought about Rebecca when he looked at Lily at moments like this, not with pain exactly, but with the specific weight of missing someone who would have loved what she was missing. Asterisk. Look at her, he would have said. Asterisk. Just look at her. Asterisk. The light changed. He drove. Lily, half asleep, said, "Dad, yeah, do you think she'll keep the star?" He considered it. "Yes," he said. "How do you know?" "Because some things aren't worth putting away." Lily was quiet for a moment. He could hear her thinking. 12 is a highly composite number, she said, because it has more divisors than any smaller positive integer. "I know," he said. "You told me. I told Miss Sterling too. I heard." She asked good questions. She did. A pause. Outside, the city moved past in its usual way, headlights, storefronts, a late bus, a man walking a dog with the purposeful speed of someone who wanted to be back inside. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah, I'm glad we went." "Me too, Bug. Even if the glass broke. Even then." She was quiet after that. By the time they reached the bridge, she was fully asleep, her head tipped against the window, her breath fogging the glass in small, even clouds. Above them, through a gap in the clouds, unexpected, because the evening had been overcast from the start, a handful of stars were briefly visible. Daniel saw them. He thought about what Lily had said at dinner 6 weeks ago. In the autumn crown. Asterisk. Some of the stars we can see are already gone. We're seeing light from thousands of years ago. Asterisk. He watched the stars for a moment through the windshield, just for a moment, because he was driving, and he was careful about things like that, and then he looked back at the road. The stars were still there in his peripheral vision. Old light, traveling an incomprehensible distance to arrive at this specific moment. Received by a man in a car on a bridge, driving home after a Thursday evening that had started with one small act of his daughter's courage and had opened, unexpectedly, into something wider. He didn't know, exactly, what came next. He rarely did. This was not, he had learned, a reason for anxiety. It was simply the condition of being alive and paying attention. What he knew was this. On the windowsill of an office on the 32nd floor of a building in Midtown Manhattan, a small ceramic star sat in a pool of afternoon light, its chipped point turned toward the window, its imperfect gold paint holding the warmth of whatever light found it. It had been made by an 8-year-old who had learned that kindness was like stars that had lit things up in the dark. It had been carried across a city in a paper bag decorated with careful marker drawings. It had been given, without expectation, to someone who needed to receive it. And somewhere between the giving and the receiving, something had changed. Not everything, not all at once, but something, which is, in the end, how change works. Not in grand gestures, not in announcements, not in the restructuring of foundation portfolios or the redesign of grant cycles, though all of those things matter. It works the way starlight works, quietly, over vast distances, arriving when you're not watching, having traveled longer than you know, and suddenly you look up, and there it is, the light from something that burned. Somewhere, long before you were there to see it. Present, real, illuminating, gently, the road ahead.